So welcome to With a Little Help from My Friends. Friends can take a lot of different forms in fiction.
I'm going to ask Kathy.
Oh.
Mute, Pam, mute.
Everything okay? All right. So friends can take a lot of different forms in fiction and in general, and most certainly in mystery. And they can be the protagonist's conscience, or they have maybe special skills. They can show different sides to issues that people are looking at. And today we're going to look a little deeper into how these particular authors use friendships in their books and why. First, let me introduce everyone. Mike Befeler is the author of 18 books and is best known for his 6-book Paul Jacobson Geezer-Lit mystery series, 2 of which were finalists for the Lefty Award for Best Humorous Mystery. He has written mysteries, thrillers, as well as a biography of a World War II soldier and a novella about a young boy during the coronavirus pandemic. He grew up in Hawaii, lived in Colorado, and now resides in Lakewood, California with his wife, Wendy. Mike spends his weekday mornings being a Zoom assistant to his kindergarten grandson. Welcome, Mike.
Good to be here.
T.K. Thorne's childhood passion for storytelling deepened when she became a police officer. It was a crash course in life, in what motivated people and what mattered to them. She served more than 2 decades in the Birmingham Police Force, where she worked in the patrol, detective, and administrative bureaus, retiring as a precinct captain. Following that, she was executive director of the City Action Partnership, a downtown business improvement district that focused on safety, retiring after 17 years to write full-time. Good for you. Her writings roam wherever her interests and imagination take her, from award-winning historical fiction to civil rights nonfiction and urban fantasy, where she mixes murder and mystery with a bit of magic. She writes from her mountaintop home northeast of Birmingham, often with a dog and a cat vying for her lap. Fleur Bradley is the author of the mystery. Oh, TK, give us a wave so everybody knows who you are. Perfect. Fleur Bradley is the author of The Mystery for Kids, Midnight at the Barclay Hotel, and her story, The Perfect Alibi, appeared in the MWA anthology Super Puzzle-tastic Mysteries. We are anthology sisters. Hi. So she's passionate about 2 things: mysteries and getting kids to read. Fleur regularly does virtual school visits and speaks at librarian and educator conferences on reaching reluctant readers. Originally from the Netherlands, Fleur now lives in Colorado. Welcome, Fleur.
Hello, everybody.
And Carrie Voorhis is a mystery writer based in Studio City, California. She worked for 15 years as an advertising copywriter for clients like JP Morgan Chase and Microsoft. Her first job ever was a proofreader with the 4 Dummies publishers, a skill she still lends to friends and family, whether they like it or not. In her spare time, she cooks, eats, and enjoys reading about cooking, eating, and people killing each other. Her short story, The Fan Dancer's First Murder, appears in the Boucher Kahn California Scheming Anthology, another anthology sister. Hi. She is currently at work on a mystery series. And I'm Eileen Rendahl. I'm your moderator. I write romantic comedy, romantic suspense, urban fantasy, psychological thriller, and cozy mystery. So today I'm going to get started asking my questions, and I'm going to try really hard not to spoil anything for anybody who hasn't had the pleasure of reading these books and stories. But sometimes that's a little bit tricky, so I'm walking a little bit of a tight line. Mike, because of issues with his short-term memory, Paul Jacobson in your Geezer-Lit series often has to rely on his friends to keep him on course. How did you decide what roles those friends were going to take?
Well, just by way of background, for those that are not familiar with the 6-book series, Paul has short-term memory loss and he's in his mid-80s. And although he can't remember the day before, he becomes an amateur sleuth and even has a romance with a young chick in her 70s. So Paul's challenge is overnight his memory resets, so he becomes an amateur sleuth, but how does he work these things? One of the key people who help him is his granddaughter, Jennifer. And I know Fleur has character J.J. Jacobson. I've got a Paul Jacobson and a Jennifer Jacobson in this series. And I really like the aspect of what I call skip generational relationships between Paul, the grandfather, and Jennifer, the granddaughter. And so that relationship plays out through the series. And in fact, in the last 2 books in the series, they like telling each other politically incorrect geezer jokes. And these are jokes that her mother, who's Paul's daughter-in-law, doesn't like them telling. She thinks Paul's a bad influence on, on Jennifer. So Jennifer and Paul sneak off every chance they can to tell each other these age-inappropriate jokes. So that's fun to do that. 3 of my other novels, I've got a paranormal 2-book series called The Back Wing and Front Wing. They also entail a grandfather and grandson relationship. And then one other standalone, Mystery of the Dinner Playhouse, has a grandfather and a grandson. So I really enjoy this aspect of it, and I can talk about other relationships, but in this one area, I really like that skip generational type of relationship with someone who helps him.
So you originally were in high-tech marketing.
Correct.
So I imagine you actually know your way around a computer pretty well, but Paul Jacobson does not. Did you do that on purpose to help develop that relationship with his granddaughter?
Yes. What I like is blending the various aspects of aging, and I got to know a lot of older people when I was younger. Now I'm one of them, but and to see people that are really afraid of computers, and that's a real aspect. And particularly in retirement homes, there are a few people that really are astute and have used computers, and others who are kind of afraid of them. So I wanted to play upon that, and of course, having Jennifer in the series is 11 and 12, and that age. Today, those kids are very tech savvy. So it was fun to play that where he doesn't want to touch a cell phone or a computer or anything. And she's always trying to get him to use these devices. So that's an interplay that they can use.
Carrie, a lot of times friends in novels have some talent or ability that helps the protagonist. In The Fan Dancer's First Murder, Eliza is extremely self-reliant. I don't want to spoil anything, but she is exceptionally able and courageous. So why put those friends in there? What were you trying to show us or tell us with friendships that she has?
Well, with the one friend, my protagonist is a 19th century con woman. And in the middle of this con involves her being in a theater situation where she's a fan dancer and a knife thrower's assistant. And her friend is a dancer in the chorus. And really the dancer in the chorus was there to give Eliza a little more humanity because she is this con woman. She's been this, her background is a criminal background, but a lot of the kindness that Eliza shows her friend Cece. And then ultimately the solution of the murder is because of a kindness that she shows Cece and a need that Cece has that Eliza fulfills throughout the book. But really the only person who actually helps Eliza throughout the book is she's running a con that involves horse dung. And it makes sense but the only person who is able to really help her out in that situation is a complete stranger. So it's interesting to have kind of, your Scooby gang of people that you can pull in and out of a story that help you in places where your protagonist needs it.
Fleur, I felt like Midnight at the Barclay Hotel was really an ensemble piece. When I read the blurbs about it, it's always JJ seems to be the protagonist, but I didn't feel like Penny or Emma were his sidekicks.
Yeah.
Did you intend that?
I think the thing to realize when you're writing for kids is that they are just way ahead of us. Meaning they are just more progressive, they're more used to teamwork. So anytime I start writing, I always have to think and check my own age-appropriate biases at the door, meaning girls are not sidekicks to boys ever. They're their own people with their own skills, their own talents, and in ways that you have to be extra careful that you don't set it up that way. Now, I started with JJ when I wrote the story because I kind of wanted him to be the ghost hunter in the story, which is what happens at the hotel. They go to the Barclay Hotel, which is kind of like the Stanley Hotel, a little spooky. He does his ghost hunting there, and he's really excited about that, but he also has a secret he's keeping from his mom. So what Mike was talking about, there's a lot of that in there as well, that sort of intergenerational play between the adult characters and the kid characters, which is really fun, and that's what makes writing for kids really fun. Penny is, holding her own. She likes to read, and she's kind of the bookworm of the group. And I think what's nice about having characters that each bring a strength is you can show, particularly kids, that you don't have to be good at everything, that as a team, you can each bring something to the table, and that really becomes your strength. It's the fact that you're working together, which is really fun to write.
I feel like it really worked well. It was something I enjoyed about it, but actually it was something that Mike said that's kind of ringing about. Penny's there with her grandpa.
Yes. Yes.
So it's that same kind of intergenerational play.
I really like the relationship between kids and their grandparents, because there isn't that parental role. There isn't that, they're trying to teach them and raise them, and they're, overwhelmed, which is what comes out of JJ and his mom's role, because she's the CEO. She's very busy. So some of it is a bit about them reconnecting. But Penny and her grandpa they kind of have a special friendship where they talk to each other, they call each other, they both like to read. Penny's grandpa is a detective, so it gave me a chance to bring in a detective with that sort of mystery solving skill to be that resource and go, okay, you have to gather motive, means, opportunity, and to kind of teach kids with the book and within the story how to solve a mystery. But it was a really fun relationship to play with, because there's not the pressure of the parent-child relationship. There's just connecting as people. And I think there can be really beautiful relationships because you're just coming as people with certain characteristics, certain things to teach each other. And both Penny and her grandpa teach each other, which I think is a really cool part of the story.
It was a really nice relationship. TK, Rose, the protagonist of House of Rose, she hasn't had friends before the beginning of this novel. She moved around a lot as a kid. She kept to herself a great deal. So over the course of the book, she learns to kind of both be a friend and to have friends. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the decision to make friendship and what it means, such a big part of the book.
Sure. It's really great to be here with all y'all, by the way. And I guess you can tell I'm not from California.
Southern California.
Southern California. So, my characters write themselves. I don't really set out planning what they're going to do. And to be honest, I wrote this book for myself. But, it turned out that Rose was my heroine, and she's kind of prickly and very much a loner. And some of that was because of her military background. And Becca is just her complete opposite. Becca is a Southern Valley girl. She is focused on, hair, makeup, your clothes, everything that Rose is not. Rose's most intense fashion choice is what t-shirt to wear with her blue jeans. And the two of them, Becca is also kind of a pushy type of friend. And so as you can see, that kind of sets up some conflict. But they both develop and they both give to each other. And it turns out that Becca has a lot of depth that Rose didn't see in her, which to me is, an important lesson for all of us, that you can label people and kind of shortcut who they are, but everybody's got strengths and depths. if we just open ourselves up to them and listen to them. So that's a long-term process in that relationship. And Rose actually learns how to have a friend. She doesn't know how.
It was interesting to me to watch her kind of figure out. It's like first she's just kind of tolerating this person who keeps buzzing around her, and then she begins to appreciate her, and then there's a real connection, and they complement each other very well. But you also have an intergenerational relationship in there too, between Rose and her great aunt.
Yeah, and Aunt Alice.
Was there a reason that you wanted to have that distance between them age-wise, or is it just how it worked out?
I guess kind of like Mike, I like, and Fleur, I like the distance of a grandparent. Well, of course, Aunt Alice is a great aunt. And she's been around for a long time, probably a little bit longer than most aunts or great aunts. And I've always been drawn to that in my historical novel, Noah's Wife. The first image that I had that I started writing from was a young girl and her grandmother. And I didn't think much about it, but one of my book club readers said, after I talked a little bit about myself, said, "Oh, that sounds a lot like your relationship with your grandmother." And I never thought of that before, but I have had an extremely close relationship with my grandmother. And I think that feeds my subconscious muse.
It came out in a really lovely way. Carrie, I wouldn't exactly call Eliza an unreliable narrator. She doesn't really lie to us, but she holds enough back that we get a kind of a big twist near the end of the story. And I wondered what role her friends played in her keeping that information to herself through most of the story, and why she makes the decision to reveal it at the end.
I think that she has to keep it to herself because her being, that anonymity is part of how she's able to get away with what she gets away with. So she has to be really guarded. And like I said earlier, her ability to have these little kindnesses with her friend Cece is how she kind of steps around that anonymity and is like, but at the same time, I have to be this anonymous person so that I can do what I'm doing. But I want to be close to you and I want to be friends with you because you are doing things that I care about. And then at the end, I think that she feels like she needs to reveal and set that anonymity aside and reveal who she is to her friend. Because, that's such a great question because and like you said earlier, without giving kind of absolutely too much away with what happens, but the exact same kindness that she performs for Cece is exactly how she solves the case. So it's almost like you gave me this ability to solve the case that I'm involved in. And so now I'm going to reveal to you who I really am. I'm going to tell you my real story and I'm going to tell you all about me almost as an exchange, like an exchange of care and an exchange of feeling for each other.
Yeah, this isn't a question, it's more of a comment, but I couldn't figure out how to make it into a question, but I kind of felt like we went on that same journey with her. At the beginning, she's kind of conning us too, and she's not necessarily an admirable person at the beginning of the story.
Right.
But you see her do these series of things and you become more and more connected to her, and then you're rooting for her, and then at the end, she gives you the rest of the story and you're like, oh, I get it now.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Fleur, in Midnight at the Barclay Hotel, the friends aren't always exactly what they seem. Everyone has a secret. Even the kids have secrets, but those secrets have to come out before they can really solve the mystery. And I was wondering if that was something that was deliberate about how they had to share that about themselves before they could solve it, or what you were, if you were trying to say something about trust or acceptance.
It's more a case of trying to resolve some of those issues before you get to the big showdown of taking down the bad guy, so to speak. But I wanted that to be a running theme, because there's so much deception by all the adult characters as well. I wanted that to be there for the kid characters too, to kind of show that you're better off telling the truth. For instance, JJ keeps a secret from his mom. Things would have been a lot easier for him had he just told the truth. And Penny is a bit reluctant to tell her grandpa how she really feels. And that's another thing where, you know, it would have been okay to tell the truth. And sometimes as adults we have that, but as kids particularly, something that is really not that big of a deal can become this big. So part of the story I wanted there was to show that, hey, you know, it would have been all right. The reaction from the adults to these secrets are really not so big. So it would have been okay just to be honest and tell the truth. So that's part of it. And then there's obviously, unless you've read it, there's a twist at some point. So that was a fun one to set up. It was fun to set up one I did not anticipate until I was already deep into writing it. So that was fun too, to see. Yeah, I didn't.
Really?
So that was kind of fun to set it up. So I hope people get a chance to read it, because it was, if you read it, you'll be like, oh, really?
Because when I hit that part of the book, I went, oh, wait a second. I went back and oh, look at all the little breadcrumbs she left for me.
Yeah, and you have to be so smart. That's the thing that is about writing, because a lot of people go, oh, it's a book for kids, you know. When are you going to write something for adults? But it is such a more savvy audience. They're sharp. The book has to be tighter. The plotting has to be there. Everything has to be perfect. So there's no room for error. Not that there's room for error when you're writing for adults, but if you've ever sat in a room with a group of 7th, 8th graders, you'll know you cannot mess up.
No,
So,
they're watching. They're watching for you. So, Mike, so there are friends, and there are friends with benefits, and Paul seems to have more than a few of those. What role does what role do romantic friends play in the book, and why was that important for you to put in there?
Okay, so the thing is, Paul, in the first book in the series, Retirement Homes or Murder, Paul's son talks him into going into an independent living facility, a retirement home. And Paul's not too sure he wants to do this, and he ends up there. And he ends up making friends with 2 other gentlemen that they have meals together. But he also meets this young woman in her 70s, and they she becomes his romantic interest. And these friends also help him out along the way. But I also wanted to portray, when I started, my first book came out in 2007, and I was first in bookstores, and I mentioned that, you know, my protagonist was in his mid-80s, and, you know, he had a romance. And I had one woman that came up and said, "You don't mean that people over 50 really have sex, do you?" And I said, "Yes, they do." In fact, having spent a lot of time in retirement homes because of my folks being there, and knowing a CEO of one who told me a story that I incorporated into a later book, there is a lot of romance and sex going on in these facilities. And, you know, so this misconception about older people, you know, they're dead and they can't do anything. I wanted to portray that, yes, they're alive, they have relationships, they have friends, they have a sense of humor. So those are all things I wanted to bring in to the story about Paul.
Which I really enjoyed, although there were a couple times with the romance, I was like, dude, no, don't do it, no. But, you know, it all works out. TK, you've written 2 award-winning historical novels set in the Middle East and a nonfiction book on the 1963 Birmingham church bombing case. How in the world did witches and police get combined in for your new novel?
Well, it started with a toothbrush,
Of course.
but also with the fact that the police officer, I think it was many years ago, and you know, originally as a writer, I guess I went far afield. As you mentioned, my 2 previous novels are stories of 2 unnamed biblical women. And after that, I had the honor to write about the investigation of the 63 church bombing case where 4 little girls were killed. And that was an event that changed history. So that was a pretty awesome opportunity. But I think it was that story kind of prepped me to write House of Rose, although I wasn't aware of it. And I think that's because technology changes, but the feelings and the perspectives of being a law enforcement officer is something you just never lose. So doing that, the bombing investigation book, I think it reconnected me subconsciously to police work. But back to the toothbrush, I was standing at the sink, brushing my teeth, wondering what my next project would be, when 3 little words popped into my head, along with the almost physical sensation that my fingers needed to be on a keyboard because a story was lurking there. And I'd love to hear from the other panelists if they've ever had that feeling with very little to go on that there's a story about to be born. But I spit out the toothpaste, what are you gonna do, and raced to my laptop where I typed those words. And the words were, "You're a hero." Then I kind of stared at them, pretty bewildered, until the fingers started typing again. And it turns out that those words were directed to a young policewoman named Rose, who had chased a suspect down a dark alley and found herself in the middle of every officer's nightmare. A life and death situation where she was forced to fatally shoot a suspect in the back. It was love at first sight.
So also, I was wondering if I could ask you about some of Rose's non-human friends in the story. Tell me about the cats. Where did the cats come from? And why was it important for you to put those in there?
Because it was a mystery. Aren't you supposed to have cats in a mystery? But yeah, they were, you know, I kind of have to explain a little bit that the magic, Birmingham, Alabama, has a nickname of the Magic City. And that nickname came from the late 1800s when it was discovered that in the Red Mountain that runs through Birmingham, there was iron ore. And then they discovered that there was also limestone and coal nearby. And this is unique almost in the world. I think New Zealand may have such a situation, but anyway, it exploded the town. It became a boom town real fast, and they called it magic. So as my great aunt Alice says, normal people have no idea of the irony. So my setup is that there are 3 ancient houses in Birmingham, and they call themselves witches and warlocks, sort of tongue in cheek. And each of the houses draws their power from one of the ores. And those 3 ores are what makes steel in Birmingham, which is what made it a boomtown. So this is sort of a play on that. And so it's the witches, so they have to have cats. You just have
Fleur, there's a cat in your book too that I understand has a place close in your heart. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm surprised she's not showing up because she likes to stand outside the door and have me open it in the middle of talks, which is great when you have as an author school visit, by the way, because the kids love it. But yeah, she's my little kitty that's around here. She's on the cover and can't really tell on camera, but yeah, there's a kitty in the book. Because yes, absolutely, mysteries need a cat, always.
Well, Mike, you don't have a cat, you have a dog. And
Yeah.
he occasionally helps get Paul into trouble too. Is the dog based on a specific dog, or?
Absolutely. When I lived in Colorado, we had a hiking group that was led by a West Highland Terrier, a good friend of mine's dog. So I had to put that into the book. In fact, my good friend, I put his car into one of the books, and then I put his dog in as well. But the West Highland Terrier had to play into at least one novel. And in the second one, Living with Your Kids is Murder, Paul is living with his son, daughter-in-law, granddaughter, and the West Highland Terrier, Mac. So they have a good time taking walks and getting into trouble together.
That was the getting into trouble that I kind of enjoyed it, because the dog's kind of his job, is Paul's job to take care of him. And it's like, oh, again, careful. Carrie, as you mentioned, the only animal that really plays a part is the horse. And it's really not the horse itself. But I know that you're working on a new series also. Will there be pets in that? Any animals?
Yeah, it's a mystery. There's got to be a cat. My protagonist, her name is Zoe, and she has a cat named Winston, after Winston Churchill. And it's a fluffy black and white tuxedo, like the one who's currently locked in my bedroom. She also, you were talking about non-human friends. I'm going from Eliza in the 19th century, and then the novels I'm working on right now, I'm on the second one, involves a lot of, and Mike, you'll be able to speak to this, it's all of her online friends, all of her digital friends. And so those are people who may or may not be real. Is it a Twitter profile that's actually a genuine person? Or is it a bot? Like, who is she communicating with? And then those people cross over back and forth into real life. So that's another way that she's got these kind of, are they human? Are they not? Are they real? And that's kind of what I'm playing with the things that are coming up.
Fleur, the friendships from our childhood loom really large in our lives. At least they do in mine. And I was wondering if any of the relationships you created in Midnight at the Berkeley Hotel were based at all on anything from your own childhood.
Oh, that's a good question. I think a little bit, because we all take on roles sometimes when we're in a group. I probably relate the most to Penny because I was more of the bookworm. I was always a little bit cautious, not super brave. Whereas Emma, one of the other characters in the book, she's just kind of the wild card, and she goes and does stuff. So some of those people you remember, and the way that you interacted, and how they sometimes bring out the brave in you, or they bring out the book-ish in you. And part of the story in Midnight at the Berkeley Hotel has JJ believing in ghosts, and Penny is not so sure. So that's playing off of each other too. So it's those interactions where the people that you surround yourself with, whether by choice or by chance, they change how you are a lot of the time, or they make you look at yourself in a different way. I know I had friends, that were braver than I was, or smarter, or, and then you kind of look at them and go, okay, do I want to be more like that? Is that a good idea? Or that friend that always got you into trouble, that one. So there's always that one in there. And that's actually the fun one to write, because I was really good when I was a kid. So it's actually kind of fun to write those characters and have them do exactly what you feel like doing, but you never did. So.
Mike, in your paranormal series, Harold McCaffrey moves into a retirement home, and I don't think I'm spoiling because I'm pretty sure this is on the book jacket, but he gets put into the wrong wing at the retirement home, and instead of being with just regular people, there are retired werewolves and vampires with dementia. And was it different creating friendships for him in that world that it was for creating friendships with Paul in the sort of the more regular world?
Well, it was a lot of fun doing this because, again, a lot of my writing is about older characters, but I do have 3 paranormal mysteries as well. And it's fun to, again, interact between the quote normal people and the ones that have extraordinary abilities. And don't believe the myth that vampires don't age. They get older, move into retirement homes, lose their teeth, and gum people on the throat. So I like humor in building that into these relationships. So Harold gets misplaced into the back wing, and the back wing is full of these extraordinary people. The front wing is full of, quote, normal people. But Paul quickly discovers that the, quote, normal people are snobbish, aren't friendly, but the people in the back wing are extraordinarily friendly, and he makes friends with these, and he decides, these are my people. Even though I don't have these abilities that they do, I like these people. So that was the fun part for him making that transition, because much like Paul in the other series, he didn't really want to go into a retirement home, but his son talked him into it. So he's here, doesn't want to be here, but then suddenly he's making these friendships, and in fact has a love interest with the witch next door. So there are a lot of fun things that could be brought into that one that I enjoyed doing.
I actually really appreciate how you make the retirement villages look. People always talk about them like they're such awful places, but there's one here where I live that I would move into now if I could.
Yep.
It's like, really, someone's going to come make my bed and there's 2 movie nights a week? I'm in. But TK, how did your...
I said, I'm not going unless it's to Mike's retirement.
How did your experiences as a police officer in Birmingham reflect in your story? And how do your friends from your days on the police force feel about your novels?
That's a good question. So far, they've been very supportive and have really liked it. And I guess those that don't, just don't tell me about it. But I was really, they were kind of hesitant at first because they were afraid I was going to write true stuff. And, Rose is so far away from my time and me that's not an issue. What was the rest of the question?
How did your experiences as a police officer reflect in your story?
Well, Rose is a policewoman, so it's and as I mentioned before, even though technology has really changed, and I had to check on some things like, the computers in the cars and how do they do this and that, and I have some old friends who, filled me in on that, but really and truly, the basic things are the same. The emotions that you feel, the danger, the risk, the attitude of being a police officer, and I gave those to Rose. Rose is really me, except I had very tiny little hands and couldn't hold a gun right, and I was short and little, and I could hardly get all the equipment on my waist. So, Rose is a younger me with big hands, and she can handle all of that, and she's exotically beautiful. What more could you ask for?
I have to add that TK, you have a terrific post on your blog about police reform that everybody should read.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Carrie, there was something that you mentioned earlier about Eliza's kindnesses to her friend and how that helps her solve it. And it made me think of another instance in the story about there's a young man who, I'm not sure if he's on the autism spectrum or if he has OCD, but the fact that she listens to him is part of how she solves it as well. And I was wondering if that was like, how did you make that decision, and were they friends, and what did that mean for you and for the story?
Well, the reason why it's in the story is very personal. I have a nephew who has autism. He is just an exceptionally bright and amazing kid who, he's going to have a rough time in life. And so I wanted to portray somebody who has those issues. Not being a I don't know how to word this without offending anybody, but the person who can be someone who is contributing to the story, who is making a difference. And so that's important to both me and to Eliza. And I wanted to, back to the horse dung thing really quickly. I also just liked having the two people who knew Liza being, or the two people who could see through her the best were maybe the two people who were the least equipped to see through her the best. a complete stranger, and this person on the autism spectrum. Whereas everybody else who should have been perceptive, who should have known, were completely snowed. And I just liked the way that felt.
It was one of those moments when I read it, and when I was going back over it, coming up, thinking about what I wanted to ask people about, I just thought it was this great moment where you advance the plot, developed the character further, and you made a choice that like combined a lot of things in one, and which was good because we only had about 6,000 words for those stories, so that's not a lot of space to develop relationships and a mystery all at the same time. Okay, we're coming down to the wire here. See if I can come up with one last question to ask people. So did anybody have any trouble with secondary characters or sidekicks trying to take over the story? Is that something that happened to anyone?
One comment. I did not have that trouble, but I had the opposite, where in the rough draft that went to the publisher, I killed off one of the secondary characters, and my editor said you might want to reconsider that, and I did, and it's a character that people love. So I found out that lesson as an early writer about don't kill off your secondary characters. You can use them for many things.
I'll add to that briefly. In my original manuscript for Midnight at the Barclay Hotel, all the adult characters had chapters and viewpoints. In the current manuscript, it's just written from the children's perspective. But for me, when my editor read it and she said, well, we need to take down the word count some, it needs to be shorter. So I had to throw all those chapters out because I had to do something vague. So that's one way that the secondary characters for me were really big, because they're larger than life characters. They're just really fun to write because I could make them just a little bit more over the top, a little bit like in an Agatha Christie novel. And I kind of had to take that out. So that was a way that those characters were taking it over maybe just a little bit. But it is a lot of fun to write. And in the end, I think some of that, it feeds into the novel in the sense that at least the characters are well developed because I wrote them a lot.
I do actually think that that's true. I do think that it comes through that there's a lot more to them, which made it fun because you kept looking at them going, what else? What else is on?
Yeah, what else is going on? Which was super fun to write because I could just sort of get a little carried away. Yeah.
Well, it's 2:15, so I think it's time to open it up to questions from the audience. Pam, did you have some that you wanted to let us know? Oh, here's an interesting question that I'm looking right at the chat from Kathy. Has anyone created a friend while drafting that turned into an antagonist and surprised you?
Yes, that happened to me.
Oh, tell us.
It happened to me twice. Once I was driving and I had a character start talking in my head, which they do a lot. And I was confronting him about something, and actually this was the opposite. I was confronting him. My character was confronting him and saying, why did you do that? And he said, I didn't. And I'm like, what? What do you mean you didn't do that? And it was a huge turning point in the story. This is not House of Rose, but people would say, how did you, I was so sucked into that. I really thought that character was bad. And I said, well, that's because I was too. So, I enjoy writing characters that kind of take the reins a little bit. And I've had them do that. And I've had them turn, in the House of Rose, yeah, we had a twist too. I don't want to get into what it was, but it also surprised me. That's not the way I started out. So this character,
it surprised me too. I was a little bummed, to be honest. So also, how do you keep from creating superfluous friends or allies? When do you know is enough is enough?
I can take this one. I have again, the second series I'm working on, the modern day series. In the first novel, she's got the Scooby Gang of friends. So when I started the second one, I just kind of brought them all in and started just creating the scenes and creating the situations. And then I started polishing out my first draft and realized that, you know, I had this poor character wandering around that I was just having her have conversations with people, but she wasn't actually doing anything. Whereas in the first novel, she had been a big part of how that plot moved. She had been, you know, a part of the whole inciting incident. But then the second one, I was just, you know, plopping her in benches and diners and just having her talk about stuff. And then when I realized that I already had all this stuff, I had the friend who was the oracle and the friend who was the sounding board. And then I just had this person who just sat in diners and talked about stuff. So I just spent like literally the last 2 weeks writing her out. So, you know, sorry, Margot, you're not in the second. Yeah, so it's just a matter of the story need and is the friend bringing it or not.
That's a t-shirt. Sorry, Margot. You're out.
One thing I'd add is usually I have a cast of suspects, so I've learned to have a balance there. You can't have too few because then it's not that exciting. You can't have too many because you lose the reader.
Yeah, it's hard to find that balance. So do any of you or do your publishers now work with sensitivity readers for characters who are human but unlike you?
Say that again?
Do any of you or do your publishers now work with sensitivity readers for characters who are human but unlike you?
I haven't yet had the opportunity to work with too many publishers on the getting published side, but I find that I have been working with a writers group through UCLA for years. And I find that when you work with a group, you know, of interesting people that have all these different perspectives, you kind of almost get the sensitivity reading by default. Either you can borrow from their experiences, like, you know, in my instance with my nephew, so other people can hear from me about those stories, or I can hear from them about their stories, and you can kind of almost sensitivity read each other in a way. But as far as publishing, I haven't really.
I'm not publishing, but I have one book, Unstuff Your Stuff. It's about a professional organizer, and it's a woman protagonist. And my critique group, which were mainly women, were excellent at helping me tune my woman protagonist. So that was very insightful and helpful.
Excellent. Oh, somebody wants to let TK know that she's so glad that you talked to your characters. So we've still got a few minutes left. Does anybody want to talk about what they have coming up next?
Excuse me, Eileen, there's a couple
yes.
of more questions.
Oh, there are?
How do you make sure the friend doesn't overtake the protagonist?
We kind of talk about that.
Yeah. And one more there about how many sidekicks are too many, which is a little bit like what you were talking about, Mike, with the suspects. How do you find that balance?
I think that you need to make sure that your secondary or third character moves the plot forward or helps develop the character of the protagonist. And that if you hold that kind of up to, you know, what's important, then I think that helps you decide if they're needed or not. I've definitely had to cut out people. And in my early writing, I had way too many points of view, which is something that I have learned to scale back on.
Well, House of Roses just from Rose's point of view, correct? But
Writing,
actually,
not this book, yeah.
of the four of you, I think, Fleur, you're the only one who's writing in multiple points of view in her story.
Yeah, and then that is challenging. It's third person, so I have a kind of a narrator voice that's directing everything. Something I have done when I have characters where it seems like in Carrie's book where you know you have one that doesn't seem to contribute anything, but maybe they have a character perspective that you still want to keep. I've combined them before, where I have, for instance, a really fun and quirky character that adds humor to the story but doesn't really do much else. I've combined them with another trait from another character, so they became just one person rather than two, which sounds a little bit odd, when you're thinking about them as real people. But of course, in the conceptual stage, they're really still just characters that you're trying to develop. And that's a lot of the time, I think TK put it, said that, where they have to have a role, they have to bring the story forward. So if they're not doing that, that's sort of an easy test to go, okay, that character can go, or like I said, you can combine them if you like them, if they haven't, they have a purpose on some other level.
So if they're not moving the story forward, they're Margot, and they have to go.
Margot, yeah. I hope there's no one named Margot watching right now. I'm really sorry.
One example to add to that. I have one book called The VV Agency, which is a private investigator mystery. And the agency is run by Van and Vanna. And it's a paranormal because they're shapeshifters and they shapeshift into each other. So sometimes there is a male protagonist and sometimes there is a female protagonist, and so there are different perspectives on it.
Well, so I noticed a little in the comment that somebody talked about, Jackie, I think, talked about getting to know her suspects better. And this is just a little trick that I've kind of learned is when I get stuck in terms of what a character's thinking or doing, especially if it's not my main character, I really have a hard time with the bad guys. Who are they? How can I make them deeper than just they cause bad things to happen? And I have found that if I just take a blank sheet of paper and start writing from that person's perspective, that I will learn things that I didn't know. And then I'm like, oh, okay. And even if I don't even use what they said, I have a deeper understanding of that character. And that works with, multiple situations.
Here's another interesting question. Have you ever developed a sidekick to a major character? Have you ever developed a sidekick from a book to a major character in another book? So have you spun off anything? Nope.
Well, House of Rose is the first in the trilogy. So there's House of Rose and there's going to be House of Stone and House of Iron, playing off those three elements. I didn't know that when I started the book.
Now I need to write a book for Margot.
She said.
Paul Jacobson's granddaughter, Jennifer, into a middle grade story, but that's not been published, but it was fun to do.
Mm-hmm.
She's a great character. I really enjoyed her. Let's see. Well, I think that's it. So does anybody want to talk about what they have coming up next?
Can we ask you a question first?
Oh, sure.
Because you've been asking good questions. Well, Eileen, you write under a number of pen names. Why did you choose to do that rather than doing it all under your name?
So different reasons for different pen names. The first pen name I took was Eileen Carr. And I had been writing what we used to call chicklet novels, so romantic comedies. And then I wrote kind of a gritty suspense novel, and my editor at the time said, great, super, but if somebody picks up a book because it's under your name and they think it's going to be about shoes and shopping and boys, and it turns out to be about child abuse and murder and blood on the walls, they're not going to be happy. So it's okay for it to be an open secret, but they wanted it to be under a different name. And the other two names are actually intellectual property projects. So I don't own those names. The publishing house owns them. So they needed to be separate. So what do you have coming up next, Mike? You seem to be, you have your finger in a lot of pots.
Well, the main publisher I worked with for many years was 5 Star, and they dropped their mystery line back in 2015. So I started working with another publisher called In Circle Publications. They've published a number of my books since then. And we've not yet settled on a contract, but I have submitted a trilogy to them that is called the Omnipage Trilogy. It's a fictional town in the central coast of California below Big Sur. And they are humorous mysteries. One is called Old Detective's Home, which is a spoof on the detective genre. It's got the people in this retirement community being Sherlock Holmes and other retired detectives, and the people running the homes are famous mystery authors. And so it was fun to do that. And then I have, in that same town, there's one called The Mystery Yarn, which is a spoof on the cozy genre, because in 2013, I was a judge for the Mary Higgins Clark Award, which had female protagonists, but the publisher sent in every cozy book, which of course does not fit to that criteria for judging. But there were 135 cozies that my wife and I read that year, and we just laughed about the patterns. And so I just had to kind of spoof, that you got to have the recipe, you got to have the cat and dog, sometimes a ghost, a gay sidekick, a boyfriend or husband. It's in law enforcement, and all these things. So I had fun doing that. And then the third one I'll talk about some other time.
Okay. Fleur?
Sorry. So Midnight at the Barclay Hotel just came out. Think Agatha Christie for kids. So if you are a mystery reader, which I'm assuming you all are, I hope you pick it up for the kid in your life, to try to get them to become readers of everybody else's books. And I have a spooky mystery coming out in a little over a year. That's a little bit more Alfred Hitchcock, but it's not under contract yet. We're working out the details, so top secret.
Carrie?
Well, we have the Bauschreckheim anthology that should be out in November of 2020. I think that's the last date I heard. And then I'm doing more Eliza Gerard stories for the 19th century, and for the 21st century, I am looking for an agent home for my Zoe Falconer series.
Exciting. And TK, when is the next book in the House of Rose and trilogy coming out?
I'm not sure. The pandemic's kind of pushed. It was this November, and I'm not sure if it's going to come out in November or maybe spring of 2021. But I also have another nonfiction book that's coming out next spring, and I'll tell y'all a secret. I've just signed a contract on one of my historical novels for a possible movie. I'm like, oh my gosh, and I get to work on it too. So that's
very exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's going to be a many-year effort, I'm sure, and no guarantees, but it's going to be an adventure, and I'm looking forward to that.
And we are too. And I think that we've hit the end of our time. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you to our audience for the great questions, and to our host, Pam Van Allen, who handled everything so deftly. And see you around the virtual conference.
Thank you, Ellie.
Fun. Yeah, see y'all around.
Seeing you.